Yes, if y'all do need children's notes, they're right over there, a few of them. And so how many don't know the fiery furnace, three Hebrew children's story? Very familiar story. We learned this as we were growing up. And so I'm going to be reading the fiery furnace, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Just a few lines from each page. I found that the Lord led this, and it seems to be kind of neat how it worked out. Nobody will take my kingdom from me, King Nebuchadnezzar said. Nobody. So the king's officers had seen that the three Hebrew children wouldn't bow down. So the officers sent orders throughout the kingdom to all the important people as the decree was read, and they must come to the dedication of the king's golden statue. Look, some of the king's officers said, there are 3 men still standing who have not bowed down. The 3 Hebrew children said, our God can take care of us in a fiery furnace. If he will not save us, we still cannot worship your gods or the golden statue. We must be true to our God. When the 3 Hebrew children came out of that fiery furnace, unsinged, unburned, King Nebuchadnezzar said their hair is not burned either. There is not a mark on them. Nothing is burned but the ropes that bound them. And he had everyone be quiet. He said, God sent his angel to take care of these 3 men. He took care of the men who trusted him. Therefore, I make a law. Anyone who says one word against the God of these 3 men will be torn apart, and his house will be destroyed. Let's have a prayer and just ask God to bless our time together. Father in heaven, we do thank you, Lord, for this day that you've given us. And Father, we do thank you for this passage in the book of Daniel, Lord, that you've given us that just gives us so many reasons to want to continue to love you and serve you, for you do take care of your children. And Father, I pray that those who are in attendance, Lord, that you would open their minds and their hearts. Lord, that you would give them the ability, Lord, to understand and retain this message. And Father, that you would, Lord, just touch them. Lord, just open their minds and their hearts, Father, just allow them to take this, apply it to their life. And Father, that they would, Lord, indeed be able to touch someone this week. Lord, if there be one within the sound of my voice who's never bended their knee and accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior, Father, I pray that you would just touch them and convict them. Lord, allow them to recognize their need for a Savior. Lord, that let them know that we've all sinned and fall short of God's glory. For that wages of sin is death. But the Bible says for the gift of life. For the gift of God is eternal life. Lord, I pray that you would just bless our time together. Lord, let everything we say and do bring glory and honor and praise to you. And we ask this in Jesus' precious name. And all God's children say, Amen. Simply going to preach a message this morning entitled Facing the Inferno. You know, we all face infernos in our life. We all face trials and difficult situations. Some more than others. But I can guarantee you, if you're a Christian, you're born again Christian, you have been through an inferno. And if you haven't, you know, the old saying is you have a testimony. Well, sometimes you have to have a test in order to have a testimony. Yesterday I attended that WMU event, and the 3 scholarship recipients for the Andy Rhodes Memorial Scholarship was asked to speak. And I found out a lot of things about my daughter I never even knew. She told the group that she helped raise Karen Jr. And she fed them and cleaned them and bathed them and changed their diapers. And I'll give her that. I remember she changed diapers. But one of the girls said, you know, my testimony is not very convicting. It's kind of dull. It's kind of boring. She said, I didn't grow up and get in trouble. I wasn't a drug addict or an alcoholic. And I didn't do bad things. But she said, when I was 12 years old, I was raised in church. And when I was 12 years old, at Vacation Bible School, I invited Jesus into my heart. I don't know anything more dramatic than that. I believe if you're saved, you're radically saved. And she put it like this. Somebody once told her that it was God who kept her from being in those types of situations. It was God who kept her from being a drug addict, from being an alcoholic, and from doing all sorts of other things. That's a dramatic testimony. And as I've read in here in the book of Daniel, the story of the Hebrew children, that's the story in a nutshell. That's it. and other than the fact that if you've ever read any of these, it has really great pictures. And I believe that one of the reasons that I like this, the way this book tells the story, is it really captures the point of the whole story. And yet, so often, we tell these kids the story, and we tell them about Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we tell them how, it ends up coming to the point of the story where we should go out and do the things that these three Hebrew children did. But that's not, in essence, the point of the story. Now, don't get me wrong, it's some of the story, and quite a bit a lot of the story. But it's really a secondary point. It's really the secondary nature of what this story is about. Because this story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is not about what these three men of faith accomplished. I believe rather it's about God. And I believe it's about how God takes care of his children even in the midst of crisis. That's what this story is about. And as a matter of fact, I wrote down, as the book puts it, the king knew that God had taken care of it. The king knew it. A Gentile, a heathen, he knew that God had taken care of it. And so this morning, if you're a note taker, I want you to get out your notes. And I want you to begin to look with me. Let's just dive right in. There's a song I was reminded of this morning. And Lord, I love Christian radio because the Lord just puts a lot of songs in my heart. And this one's kind of old, and it goes a little something like this. And he says, I'm diving in. And it means I'm diving into the Christian life. He says, I'm diving in. I'm going deep. And over my head I want to be. And that's what we want to do when we go into God's holy word. We need to pray and say, Lord, reveal something to us. Not just on Sunday morning, but reveal something to us every day of the week. And I want you to see that God is in control even in the midst of crisis. So the first thing is God is in control during crisis. Therefore, he is worthy of our trust. God is in control, church, not us. Verse 13 and 14 says that Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? He was pretty clear. He said, if you bow down to my statue when those musical instruments play, then all will be well. But if you refuse, then you're going to be thrown immediately into the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar is basically saying, and he's taunting these three Hebrew children, he's saying, what God can get you out of this problem? What God can help save you from me? And it's almost like he's a little arrogant. Kind of sounds like a challenge too. But as you read the book of Daniel, I believe that we can see exactly where this story is going because the three Hebrew children do. Because in verses 16 to 17, they answered the king and said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. See, Nebuchadnezzar says, who can save you? No one can save you from me. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego says, hold your horses there, O your majesty. Our God is able to save us from anything that you place in front of us. It's kind of a little bit of a my father can beat up your father kind of banter going back and forth. Y'all remember doing that when you were growing up? And I always used to say, my brother can beat up your father. Because I don't know if you ever seen my older brother. He was about 6'6", 6'7". Big guy. He was always bigger than everybody growing up. But that's what's going on here. They're saying, my dad can beat up your dad. And so the three Hebrew children, they say, the God in whom we serve will be able to save us. And they say, are you hearing that, O king? Are you hearing that, dear Jewish people held in exile? And I want to ask you this morning, are you hearing that, church? Those who may be oppressed and afflicted, those who may be persecuted and tired and weary, are you hearing that modern day church when the naysayers say that God is not relevant in the 21st century? Our God can take care of us even in the midst of a crisis. And the three Hebrew children say, we won't give in because the God we serve will save us. How many of us have ever said that? How much we've been to a point in our lives where we've had to say, no matter what comes our way, my God can deliver me. My God You might be low on finances. God will provide a way. You might be low in food. God will always provide a way. And as we get to verse 18, and I like this verse, it says, but even if he doesn't, the three Hebrew children said. I think this is one of the best verses in the whole book of Daniel. But even if he doesn't, even if our God chooses not to intervene, they say, Your Majesty, you can be sure that we will never serve your gods. We will never worship that gold statue that you have set up. Even if. I was doing some research this week, and I was looking up some statistics. I don't know if you've ever, I know I've shared this before, Voice of the Martyrs. I believe it's persecution.com is the actual website. And I was reminded of how many Christians that have been killed because of their faith. Because you see, the Hebrew children were willing to hold on, even if things didn't turn out the way they thought it would. They were willing to hold on because they knew God was in charge. They knew that he was in control of their circumstances, not King Nebuchadnezzar. They knew that he was going to work things out for his plan and his purpose. You know, as I was studying and researching these statistics, it came to mind that there are plenty of times when God doesn't work things out the way we'd like him to, huh? How often have we prayed and God's answered, and the answer's been no? How often have we prayed, and because of our impatience, we wanted so bad for God to answer. We wanted to hurry the Holy Spirit along. Yet God was not answering at all. I believe Garth Brooks put it well and said that some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. And as we look back in our life, we can see just where God was there, because he's there every step of the way. But things that he did not allow us to have was for our own good. And on persecution.com, it is estimated that there have been 70 million Christian martyrs over the last 2,000 years. About 37 million of those were Christians who died at the hands of the Communist Party in the 20th century. Over half of the Christians who have ever died because of their beliefs have done so within the last 100 years. About 12.5 million of those martyrs died during the 13th and 14th century in China at the hands of Genghis Khan. You know, these statistics show that there's a lot of believers who said, even if. They stood boldly. They said, even if our God chooses not to save us and bring us out of the situation we're in, we're still not going to serve your gods. You know, one of the aspects of my calling as a pastor allows me to deal with people who are in different stages of crisis within their lives. I've had the opportunity to be in a hospital room when more than one person has taken their last breath and went on to be with the Lord. I've had the opportunity to not only minister to families when other family members have passed away, but minister to couples who are struggling in their marriage, couples who are struggling in their finances. Been with couples who find themselves faced with foreclosure or eviction or a loss of a job. I've seen some terrible circumstances within the course of my pastorate. Some have been at the individual's own doing. But all too often, some of these things happen simply because we live in a fallen and an imperfect world. And many people have different responses to some of the tragic situations that we're in. I think I shared this with you. I had the opportunity to meet with a young man who wasn't even 28 years old. And he began to get fatigued a lot. He began to get tired after barely walking from here to the back door. And so he went to the doctor, and he was told that he would eventually need a heart transplant because his heart was failing. And so he told me, I said, well, what's going through your mind? He said, well, I serve an awesome God. And he said, instead of saying why, I just say, what now? What now? Okay, Lord, what do you got for me now? Are you going to deliver me? Because I believe if you're a born-again believer, there's going to be two ways he delivers you. One, being supernaturally, and he's going to heal your body. Or two, if he calls you home, brothers and sisters, we're healed. No more pain and no more suffering and no more sorrows. And I've heard people who've been in automobile accidents say, you know, Pastor, I did the right things. I even wore my seatbelt. I don't understand why this miserable thing has happened to me. How can I go on? And, this isn't the life that I had chosen or that I had thought that may be happening to me. As I read Daniel chapter 3, this was the situation that we found our three Hebrew children in. And you have to remember, they hadn't chosen to live in Babylon. They were being held captive. They hadn't chosen to live high-profile lives and be high-profile people. They were not loud-mouthed troublemakers out there stirring up things. They hadn't chosen their ordeal. Their ordeal had been dumped right in their lap. And if you think about it, each and every one of us has experienced it. And we all have different reactions. They had every right to be upset. They had every right to be bitter. But that was not the approach they took. They said, we know that God can rescue us. But even if He doesn't, we'll be faithful anyway. God is in charge. It is not about us. It's about Him. And all too often we look at our situation and we think, oh me, oh my. Oh, it's all about I. It's all about me. Why don't we look to see what the big picture is and what God may have in store for us? Now, if you know the story, you know how it turned out. God did save the three Hebrew children, and He did it in a miraculous way. And I believe that He is capable of doing so, but all too often we don't see that big picture that God has in store for us. He doesn't always choose to save us or to bring us out of the situation the way we think. But sometimes that's just the way it is. God is God, but we are not. And we need to understand that God is in control, and He is capable of being there even during crisis. So we need to trust Him. Another passage where it points this out real clearly is we can also learn, if you're a note taker, that God is in control even in the midst of crisis, and He is worthy of our faith. Look with me at verse number 28-29. And the king said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent His angel and delivered His servants that trusted in Him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. Their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. I believe that this is a great confession of faith. And this comes from probably one of the most unlikeliest people that you would have ever thought. You wouldn't have thought that this would be the source coming from King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar had been nothing but trouble for the Jewish people. And yet, here he is confessing faith in the God of the Bible. It's amazing how God works. Because we now have confessions of faith about God from the three Hebrew children. And we now have a confession of faith from the king himself. Matter of fact, we don't even see Daniel in this story. The key players here are Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and the king. I don't know, maybe Daniel was chilling up in the mountains in his cabin or something. We don't know. But we do know what God done through these three Hebrew children. And I believe in the sense that it represents two types of responses to God's saving power. I believe it's on the back of your notes. The first one we'll see is a consistent response I want to look at this morning. This is the response of the three Jewish men. They were unmovable in spite of the crowd. They were unmovable in spite of those around them, the peer pressure that they must have been under. Matter of fact, they took the first of the 10 Commandments very seriously. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And I looked up a passage in my reference book. And there's a word, and I have it up there, it's called Shema. It's a Jewish affirmation. It's a declaration of faith. It's Hebrew. And in Deuteronomy 6:4, the Bible says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and all thy might. You see, these three amigos, these three Hebrew children, they took this stuff so seriously that they were willing to lay down their life just so they wouldn't serve any other God but the one true God. And they knew that God was going to rescue them, either through bringing them out of the fire or bringing them on into glory. doing so, they became heroes. They became role models, if you will, to all those that were around them. But you have to understand, this wasn't the first time that the Jewish people went through something like this, and it probably, as we know, wasn't going to be the last time that they had gone through this. Matter of fact, they were in Babylonian captivity because of their disobedience, because of their wayward faith. The Jews had become too familiar with the shiny, glitzy gods of their neighbors. They were not having an exclusive relationship with God Almighty because they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. And that's why God sent the Babylonians to exercise His judgment. And I believe it's a pressure that we all struggle with. We aren't a whole lot different. Matter of fact, we live in a world with more gods than we can name. And the pressure to bow down to or to recognize the gods of our neighbors is incredible. And we do it all the time without even thinking about it. We've pretty much given up keeping any kind of Sabbath, keeping any kind of day devoted to God because we're too busy bowing down to the shiny god of busyness. We don't have to bow down to 90-foot statues anymore because our big screens, those with animation and movement, have become our God. We bow down to the God of entertainment we don't even think about. How many of you have ever heard of John Calvin? Came up with what might be known as Calvinism, the 5 points of Calvinism. He made this statement: the human mind is a factory of idols. That is, by nature, we are always setting something up in place of God. We're always creating a God in our own image to suit ourselves and the things that we're doing. Because the idols today, they have a slightly different appearance. Nobody has yet to raise a 90-foot tall golden statue and told us to bow down. But we all face the same pressure as the early followers of God. But yet these three men were willing to go to the furnace for their faith and serve as role models, serve as martyrs for other people to see that the trust they had was in the sovereignty of God. Now that's the first response, the consistent response. There's another response, and that would be the inconsistent response. And this comes from King Nebuchadnezzar. Now you have to understand, King Nebuchadnezzar is a very interesting character. He's a brilliant ruler, but if you ever read his stories, he's kind of dense. And a matter of fact, in chapter 1, he's so impressed by Daniel and his friends that he pulls them out from their little training leadership academy that he had for them. He thought these guys were great witnesses in chapter 1. In chapter 2, this is when Daniel interprets the king's dreams that he was having, where no other person in the king's kingdom could interpret these dreams. Daniel was called upon. And then we have this confession in chapter 2, verse 47. It says, the king said to Daniel, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord over kings, a reveler of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. We read this and we think, man, Nebuchadnezzar's made a public profession of faith in the one true God. Man, maybe now he's a believer. But then in some verses later, the same king erects a 90-foot tall golden statue and makes people, tries to make people bow down to them, to the statue, or face death. And then in chapter 3, where we've been reading, he proclaims, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angels to rescue his servants. Therefore, I make this decree, and if any man says anything about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he'll be torn limb from limb. It seems like our King Nebuchadnezzar might be a little OCD or ADD, or he just can't keep his making up his mind, and he just keeps going back and forth. Because in chapter 4, he has another dream. And those within his kingdom still can't interpret his dream, so he calls upon Daniel. And Daniel interprets it, and he says, all the wisest men of my kingdom have failed me, but you can tell me because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Did you hear that? He actually said the holy gods. See, Nebuchadnezzar is what we call a polytheist. That means he worshiped many gods. And we see he just doesn't get it Because after proclaiming that the God of Daniel and his friends was the one true God, the powerful God, he's still talking about gods in the plural sense. See, his perspective of the God of the Hebrews was he was a mighty and powerful God, but he was just one of many. That's what being pluralistic is, or being a polytheist. This is why he honors the Hebrew God in one breath, but yet in the next few verses he's setting up a 90-foot statue and making people bow down to it. He saw no contradiction in this. And that's what the world tells us today. You can have any God you want, as long as you're not narrow-minded, as long as it's not exclusive. And unfortunately, this is the sense that has been functioning with the Jewish people all throughout Old Testament history. They go back and forth. And despite the fact that they acknowledge the one true God, they wanted to always be like their neighbors. They wanted to have other gods. They wanted to fit in. They wanted to, in essence, have mistresses. They wanted to be God's special people, but they wanted to do what they could to be friends with their neighbors. However, God, the one true God, who revealed himself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one true God who delivered his people from the Egyptian bondage, the one God who was with Daniel in the lion's den, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego within the fiery furnace, he demands exclusive allegiance. And that's the big struggle that we have in our lives today. I was sharing with my dad yesterday, and we were talking about some of the modern conveniences that we have. It amazes me, and I don't know if I've told you this story, but Nikki's going off to college. And when we toured the dorm she's at, they showed her the laundry facility. I'm like, oh good, free laundry. You ain't got to bring it home with you on the weekends. But these laundry machines, the washer and dryer, are so state-of-the-art that there's a little keypad to punch in your phone number. And when the washer's done, it'll text message her and tell her the washer's done, come put it in the dryer. When the dryer's done, it'll text message her and say, it's come pick it up. Man, that blew my mind. I got something like that. It's called my lovely wife. Honey, the laundry's done. But my dad, I told him, we were watching The Rifleman. And my wife told him, she said, Dad, Scott would still love to live like that. No electricity. I said, come on, Dad, let's do it. And he reminded me that he was born in 1939 in a log cabin. And they had no electricity. And he said, I know I could do it because I've done it before. He said, but son, I really like air conditioning. I really do. That's one of the greatest inventions of all time. And I said, well, now that you're in Lower Alabama, you're going to love it all the more. But see, that's a big struggle that we have. Because we want to honor and serve the Lord, but there's temptations there to divide our allegiance, where God is not the hub of the wheel. He's rather a spoke on the wheel. And that's not how we need to live our life. Because we want to serve the Lord, but we want to be rich too. We want to serve the Lord, but we want to be powerful too. We want to serve the Lord, but you can fill in the blank. Whatever it is that's a vice in your life. So we have to ask a question. How are we going to respond to God? How are we going to let him know that we know that he is in control and he is worthy of our trust? Are we going to be like the three Hebrew children and be consistent? Or are we going to be like Nebuchadnezzar, who is impressed with what God has done with them, but really is kind of flaky in their follow-through and in their application in their day-to-day lives? You see, this message of Daniel chapter 3 to me is clear. It tells us that God is in control even in the midst of our crisis. Therefore, he is worthy of our trust even during those crises. Because we have to understand, if that crisis includes stepping into a fire, then we need to say, so be it. If that crisis includes stepping into the unknown, we need to say, so be it. When God says, who am I going to send, who will go, we need to be the one to stand in the gap and say, here I am, Lord, send me. That's what God's called us to do. And I'm glad that we're telling this story to our preschool. And I'm glad that we're telling this story to our school-aged children. Because I believe that this is something that we want them to take with them all throughout their life. Yes, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were great men of faith. But it was because of It's He that is the one who allows them to walk through the fire. It's He who's the one who allows them to walk through the lion's den without getting one scratch on our body. And I don't know about you, but I've walked through lion's dens before. Maybe not literally, but metaphorically. I've been through the fire. I've faced the inferno. And God has delivered me, and He has brought me through, and He has made me the man I am today because of His grace and His mercy. God is in control, church, even in the midst of crisis. So I believe, therefore, He's worthy of our trust. I believe He's worthy of our faith. I believe He's worthy of our allegiance, that He's worthy of our praise, that He's worthy of our adoration, even during the midst of these crises. We have to remember God is in control, and we are not. And if you're here this morning, and you say, Pastor, well, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I've never experienced anything like that, or I've never had any trials or any major tribulations, and I trust God daily, but I still like to do some things, and I still like to go to these places. We can't have our cake and eat it too when it comes to God. He tells us point blank in His Word, it's all or nothing. He'd rather us be cold if we're not going to commit to Him fully and be on fire for Him. He said, I don't want a lukewarm Christian. I don't want one that has one foot in the church and one foot in the world. I don't want one that straddles the fence. He said, I want all your life. So if you're here this morning and you've never given Him all of your life, you'll have an opportunity in just a few minutes. And as we begin to have a time of prayer and a time of invitation, God is inviting you to put your cares and cast your worries and your concerns onto Him. Give it over to God. Let God handle your problems. I've heard it said, let go and let God. That's what we need to do. If you've never accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, I just want you to ask and contemplate this during the time of prayer. If you were to die today, where would you end up? And if you can't answer that question, then I would just ask that you come down to the altar. Just grab me by the hand and say, Preacher, I need to know. I need to have an assurance of my salvation. I need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm born again. And if you're here and you are a Christian and you've given your life to the Lord, and you just say, well, Pastor, things aren't going well for me, and I just don't know what to do, and I'm struggling in this area and that area, or my job, or my family, my finances, whatever it may be. God is in control. He can take care of that situation. He can lead you through the fire and keep you right on going without being singed, without a hair on our head burned. No effects whatsoever. God can do it. And I pray that we put our faith and trust in Him, knowing that He is in control and we are not. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we do thank you, Lord, for this example that you've given us in Scripture. Father, we thank you that you are in charge and you are in control.